All right, so the next thing we want to do is talk to someone who has been working in this area for a very long time and is a great partner of Scanifly's. So we're bringing in Todd Lindquist to talk more about design and what it's like to do different parts of the design workflow, build a career around doing design work, and experience outsourcing it. Todd is currently the Key Account Technical Supervisor for Eagle Point Solar, one of the leading contractors in Iowa and in the Midwest. Todd graduated from the University of Wisconsin in Platteville in 2017, where he earned a Bachelor's of Science in Sustainability and Renewable Energy. He holds a NAPSET PV installation certification. Todd is passionate about the environment and alternative forms of energy. He is tasked with supervising the lead technical team on all key accounts and works in conjunction with Eagle Point's sales team on strategic opportunities for PPAs, municipalities, schools, and C&I projects. And Todd holds extensive experience performing site assessments, designing solar systems, estimating, engineering customized CAD drawings, solar installation work, and he's also an FAA remote pilot. So Todd, it's a real pleasure to have you join us. We've worked together for a really long time and really, really excited to learn from you today. So thanks so much, Todd. All right, so
thank you, Jason. I appreciate it.
Awesome. What I'd love to do is start out, if you can describe Eagle Point's current design process, and even talk about some of the areas that it's evolved as you've gone the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be happy to. If you want me to dive in any deeper, we can talk as broadly or as in detail as you would like. Just tell me to stop whenever you want.
Go for it. Let's start with the design process. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, we receive, marketing or sales receives a new lead, and we receive their utility bills. That gets passed on to our energy analyst. So basically, our preliminary designers. We use remote design tools, two-dimensionally, and we have a good understanding of their goals, and we put together a preliminary report based upon those goals. Input that module layout, that design into our utility modeling and financial analysis software to really, figure out what their savings would be, environmental impacts, depending upon what they care about, figure out what their incentives would be. And then we deliver that report back to our salesman who would reach out to the customer to present that preliminary report. If the customer kind of likes what they see, then we move on to really a more detailed design where Scanifly really becomes a very useful tool along with, the drone survey. So we then schedule a site visit if the customer wants to move forward. We will come out, fly the drone. We will take a look at the electrical, the structural information. Even if it's ground array, we'll look at any site-specific characteristics that will be important. During construction, whether that's, private or public utilities, et cetera. So we take all that information that we gathered, on site, bring it back in-house, and whether we may pass that off internally to a different designer, and then they'll put together the kind of final design with those site-specific characteristics most oftenly in Scanifly using that 3D model. We then have a nice presentable image to share with our customers, and that's pretty much it. So we present that final report to our salesman, and then they will go over the final numbers with the customer. If they
Awesome.
like what they see, then then you start moving into the contract phase.
Yeah, fantastic. So if I zoom out a whole bunch, we're talking about a remote preliminary design followed by a drone-based site survey into final design and engineering work. I'd love to get a sense for how that process has evolved over the last few years. I know Eagle Point is always focused on leveling up on technology, on thinking about ways to be more efficient, to deliver more value, to drive more quality. So what have been some themes and some areas of evolution for the whole design flow that you just walked through?
Yeah, absolutely. We're always trying to expedite our sales and design process, and those two things kind of go hand in hand. We've looked at digitizing our workflow as much as possible. We adopted, the drone program in 2018 and started working with Scanifly. That was pretty revolutionary for us. We used to just climb up on ladders and pull tapes, and put ourselves in, riskier scenarios, being somebody that used to do that, on those steep pitch roofs, and that wasn't always the best thing. Or use, for those that have been around the industry for a while, a soulmetric sun eye and take, physical view sheds, and that would be tedious and time consuming. So yeah, we've seen a really vast evolution in what we've done in our design process. You could even take it as far as like estimating. I think early on in the industry, it was just kind of a cost per watt estimate based, and you didn't have as much experience or previous knowledge of prior projects to kind of do more like historical pricing. We moved away from like a cost per watt analysis to more like actual unit pricing that we get updated by our supplier that we have a great relationship with. We used to try to train a specific employee to kind of do it all. That is hard to onboard. So we kind of specialized our internal design resources, broke up the site assessment into its own job, the preliminary report into its own job, and then kind of like the final design into its own role as well. And, when you work across the tri-states in the Midwest, we work in Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin, there's a lot of different AHJs and utilities. It's in the hundreds. So there's a lot. It's hard to remember and know all the rules for all the different AHJs. So we kind of specialize and formed internal teams where our designers and sales people work on similar geographic regions and similar AHJs.
It sounds like there's been a degree of sophistication that's gone through the design flow regarding specializing different parts of the value chain. It's almost like an assembly line now as the project flows through. Just out of curiosity, do you guys have ways to track that efficiency increase or that lift from technology, or ways to understand how the evolution of your process has actually sped things up or made things better?
I don't know if we'd have the actual data, but I believe that, everybody in upper management that manages the resources around the process would definitely agree and be able to, think back to before we made the change and after we made the change and really see the improvement.
Yeah.
It's hard to see the day to day, but when you take the big picture view, it's holy crap, how far have we come?
Yeah. Well, I know we worked together for a long time, and seeing how many projects you guys are doing post sale and the quality of those projects and the very detail and specific difference and the regional differences of all those projects, I can validate that it's led to a really nice growth for a company. So kudos to you guys for that. I'd love to go into the outsourcing theme, where we spent a lot of time in the thought leadership piece of our webinar. What areas is Eagle Point outsourcing work, and how is it if you work with subcontractors? What is that like?
Yeah, absolutely. We outsource similar to other members of this webinar. We outsource the electrical or structural engineering at times. Oftentimes, different AHJs will require a structural analysis for permitting reasons. So we have a partner that we work with to achieve that. If we need stamped electrical drawings, we will outsource for that. Or if we just have complicated electrical engineering work where some utility is requiring something unique or different or new to us, even looking ahead into like the construction side of things, we'll utilize electrical subcontractors, to help with backlogged work or help in geographical areas where, we don't have a local labor force yet. Basically anything that's like a specialized service, whether that be fencing, boring, surveying, just to name a few, we're not afraid to get an expert in, like you said.
Yeah, we know you guys do a fair amount of ground mounts at ranches or people's backyards. So I imagine you don't have multiple staff of tunnel borers at the company or trench runners.
We do have trench runners, but when it
Okay.
comes to boring, that is its own animal.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe pun intended there. Um, and then for the electrical and the structural piece, um, and I'm putting you in the spot here, but I'd love to get a sense for kind of the teamwork around that, right? When you're subbing out that part, right? So if you're a designer in-house, how do you then work with those individuals outside of the company? And what does that handoff process look like for you guys?
Yeah, we've gone through a couple different partners on the structural side of things. I think the one we use today, I don't deal with it every day, so I apologize if I misspeak a little bit, but we basically have a centralized location where we share all of our information back and forth, like a portal where we add a new project in, and they will then take that on as soon as they possibly can, and then kick it back to us when it's complete. And if there's anything unique, I believe that will just get handled by either some emails, phone calls, etc. When it comes to the electrical side of things, we have again, another partner that we work with, have built a great relationship over the years. And it's emails, phone calls, Microsoft Teams meetings, to go over, project specific challenges and how we can overcome them.
So in essence, these guys are like an extension of your business in terms of the partnership you're working with them for.
I would say so.
Yeah, great. I want to go back to the AHJ topic. If you look geographically, you guys do really spread across a variety of areas. Can you talk about, in a little bit more specific way, those geographic differences? You could touch on the AHJ side, but I almost would also be curious, is there a workflow difference or a home architecture difference? But really speaking to the implications of those geographic differences on the design workflow. I'd love to hear how you guys see that day to day, how that affects your workflow, what those geographic differences mean for your company.
Yeah, happy to touch on that. When it comes to different geographic regions, if we're specific, if we have experience in those AHJs, they may require, us to gather more detailed or different information than maybe our run-of-the-mill project would. Whether that be, more structural information, more measurements. I'm thinking of one AHJ in particular, like the city of Madison is just for an example, is very particular in how they approve, say, structural analysis. They want to use like their tools and etc. So it's just a different, unique process. It can definitely be achieved. It's just something you got to work around and make sure you gather the right information, so you don't have to potentially go back out and revisit the site. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And that's a good example with different cities. I know here in the Northeast, right, especially early on in solar, the varied degrees of fire setback rules between
Right.
each jurisdiction was a lot. Let's just put it that way. And so how that affects your data collection and then ultimately your final design, and maybe you can't fit as many panels as you promised in the sales process or even the initial design stages, right? And then if on install day it's not correct, right? There's a lot of geographic nuances that are tough to follow unless you're a local contractor working in it every day.
Right. Yeah, especially if it's new to you and you just don't know what codes that they enforce. Yes, it's sometimes you just need to make sure that you. What I didn't touch on previously was that it may change the way that you go about the estimate. You might want to go down and have a bit more detailed estimate in different categories, whether that be, on the electrical side of things or on the solar side of things. So that's kind of
It's
how we
really
handle it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because a lot of times the preliminary design or the estimate, right, usually done on a satellite image is a max fill, uh, which has benefits, but might be a total miss if it's not in consideration of, let's say, the city of Madison's requirements or a certain fire setback rule. And so that mismanagement of expectations by the time you hit a final design could create a lot of pressure on a design workflow, for example.
Absolutely. We're always striving to make our preliminary designs as accurate as possible, but there's also a balancing act of, you there's a large volume of them, so you got to balance how much time you're spending them on the front end. So I would always love the most detailed preliminary as possible, like you said, to set the right expectations. But sometimes that's just not achievable given workflow and volume that you have to do.
Yeah, we've seen a bunch of contractors recently outsource their prelim design process, and it's actually a pretty expensive proposition in my opinion. I understand why people do it, but they're in essence is getting a max fill on a bad satellite tile and starting the customer conversation with that in mind. And I think there's some risk in that, right? From an expectation management, from a change order perspective of what you've promised in the prelim to what you actually can do with after the on-site survey. Um, and while I think it helps from a scaling perspective, I think it undercuts the quality implications that are needed to consider all the factors in mind. Just because you can put, 50 square rectangular tiles on a blurry picture doesn't mean that that's actually what's going to fit. That's the type of quality. That's the opposite of the quality that I think we need to see in our industry as we grow and mature.
I agree.
Cool. All right, so I want to touch on a couple more themes before we wrap up. So I know you love tech, and I know you love to dig into a lot of different things and tinker. So how has software or new pieces of hardware, how has tech changed your company's workflow, both broadly speaking and then also as for that design process?
Oh, so much. Even with COVID, adopting, the use of Microsoft Teams more, at least for us specifically, just more teleconferencing options, maybe on the preliminary side of things, on the sales side of things, being more open and adopting more remote selling techniques, which allows us to reach a broader audience and save some time as well as far as travel time, so you can be a bit more efficient. On the design side of things, obviously, adopting a drone program in 2018, and today we now have 12 pilots. That was a massive a technology increase for us. We at that same time we moved away from kind of pen and paper site assessment documentation to more electronic, digitizing your field ops as you guys said, and then we move more towards having iPads with our field ops or our site assessors. That added a lot of flexibility, whether it's upgrading a design document to them, getting them information, us being able to see the progress photos remotely, so they're taking photos of the job throughout construction, and then even using those potential photos that were gathered by our installers for marketing. So tech has definitely been important for our company's growth.
How do you think it's influenced your customer's experience, the homeowner, the property owner, right? How does your inclusion of tech, drones, particular imagery, digitizing things, how has that affected the customer experience and also the perception of who you are as a company?
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, but prior to adopting Scanifly, we were just two-dimensional imagery, placing squares on satellite imagery. You can't always see all the obstructions or know all the measurements. with an actual 3D modeled, photogrammetry site, you can get a lot better accuracy, a lot more accurate designs, which then run that down the chain. It's less change orders. So, our installers can be more confident in the design that they're receiving. Yeah, we definitely used to have a lot more change orders or as-built modifications to module placement, for example, because of some obstruction that we didn't know about, or we didn't know the precise measurement, or even if we did, pull tapes and get up on the roof, maybe we wrote it in some scribble scratch, and the person that interpreted the design didn't read it properly.
So it sounds like the homeowner is going to get a better experience. Do you think that they view your business differently now that you're showing up with a drone, or you're doing a design that was more digitized, or your overall process has leveled up from technology? What is their perspective?
I think it just brings a whole level of professionalism. Maybe makes us seem more trustworthy. Um, yeah, I mean, and homeowners are always excited to see drones. They're always interested if they've never seen one in person. They always just get curious. They kind of want to look over your shoulder if there's kids around. They always want to like see how it works. People get excited, but then you do got to make sure that you get their approval to fly the site and all that stuff. And sometimes neighbors will get curious, but you just got to make sure they know that you only care about surveying the roof. That's all you really care about.
Yeah, we usually joke that no one's taking pictures of the neighbor in their swimming pool, although there was one case we heard of where there was a concern. um, uh, Tie it back to the outsourcing theme, right? So the digitization of your workflow, leveling up with tech, how has that positively or negatively impacted your ability to work with your design partners externally, or other partners that you sub out to?
Yeah, it's easier to share information. We can even share those drone photos, which I've done, to our structural engineers. Kind of gives context to looking at blueprints or looking at drawings. It, it it's along with your structural images. It just makes things so much easier. You can create a shared location where you both can upload documentation, drawings, photos, whatever it is. It just makes things so much easier.
Yeah, I think it sounds like you guys are experiencing a more seamless process from the contractors that we've heard of that outsource parts of their workflow that don't digitize. I've heard of situations where they're sending pictures of the scratch paper to a remote designer and they can't read it, as an example. So it sounds like you guys are getting a big lift because there's no shortage or guesswork, in your workflow. Right? It's all much more crisp.
Right. The less assumptions we have to make, the better.
Yeah, and I'm sure that helps with speed too. Last question, then we'll open it up for Q&A. As I've said before, we've known each other for a long time, and I personally have loved seeing your growth in your role and your role in your company and in just overall industry. We have a few students on this webinar. Our academy reaches thousands of future solar professionals around the world. It's something we take great pride in. I know you take great pride in leveling up your skills. What advice would you give for people either new to solar, students in solar, want to join solar? What would you like to share with them about how to grow in the industry, become a leader, grow your skills, work better with partners externally? Any advice to share to close out?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm the best person for advice, but I'll give my 2 cents, or things, or a piece of advice that I was given once by a professor that I really liked. He told me, know what you know and know what you don't know, and I've really valued that piece of advice over the years. Anybody that really knows me and has worked with me professionally, if you don't know something, or if I don't know something, I'll be the first one to ask the question. And I don't think you really need to know everything either. You just need to know where to go to find the answer. So I always recommend, good notes and be organized. And it's really important to find an organization that will allow you to grow and a culture that you'll fit in.
Thanks, Todd. Well, I know that this audience and all of us have learned stuff from you today. So you know a lot more than you give yourself credit for. But it's been a real pleasure to get your insight, to hear what you've been up to, what Eagle Point is focused on, and to have this discussion. So thanks so much. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Billy, who will open it up for a Q&A with the audience.
That's correct. And before we move into the Q&A portion, we have one last question for the Scanifly crew. If you folks wouldn't mind answering, we've got, what is your preferred follow-up from the Scanifly team? I want to schedule a workflow consultation. I'd like to see a demo of the Scanifly platform. I'd like to learn more about Scanifly's design services and enjoyed the discussion, but I'm good for now. And take this moment to answer that, and we'll shortly open up the floor for some questions from the audience. And remember, you can continue to submit those now in the Q&A window, and we'll take a few up until the hour ends. And okay, just wait on that for a moment. Do you want me to just keep this up and go into a question, and then I can shift over?
Yeah, why don't you keep it up, and then we can jump into the Q&A at the same time.
Okay, great. So first on deck, can you explain what the different design service offerings you have are?
Sure. So we've got roughly 4 offerings right now. And so we'll walk through them, and they're based on degree of sophistication and depth. The first one we call wireframes, as Chance outlined, and that is going to be a outline sketch of the roof and all the roof planes, as well as the obstructions, or as we call them, keep out zones. And that will be turned around in sub 3 hours and costs about $20 per project, built into your subscription if you want it, or purchase a la carte. And the idea is that it reduces all of the sketching time to build out your overall layout. The second we call site plans. That is a full design all the way through your PV system. So it will include not just what's included in wireframes, outlines, and keepouts, but it will also include your shading analysis, which is bankable, and your PV layout, which will be done informed by your preliminary design that you're submitting for information. And then that can ultimately be generated in a CAD export if you need it. And just to be clear, the wireframe can also be generated into a CAD export if you want to do all of your work in CAD afterwards. And then the third option is what we're calling a plan set, which is the accumulation of the prior to, right? So the full PV layout, and then also taken into CAD for a full plan set engineering docs, which is what Chance walked through a few moments ago. That includes your stringing, your electrical layout, your different hardware specs, all of that packaged together. And then the final option is if you want to throw stamping onto that as well. And so those are the 4 different offerings. Again, you've got wireframes, which is just rough sketching. You've got site plans, which is your full PV layout. You've got site plans, which is a full plan set, and then you can add stamping onto it. All of those can be taken into CAD and exported. All of those are designed in Scanifly, so you can access them whenever you need to as well.
Great. And next on deck are the new drones from DJI M3, M3 Pro in the enterprise line, and Autel Evo 2 supported by your software.
Yeah, Scanifly's software is drone agnostic, as long as it takes a geotagged image of the property, which is all the drones you've listed and a bunch more. So really, you can choose any drone you want. All of them apply. We recommend the Autel Evo 2 as one of the top options, as well as the Mavic Air 2S, because we believe those have the best forms of automation, for the flight methodology we recommend. But ultimately, all of them work, and they all are great. What we care about is collecting high-quality data to make as good of an output as possible.
And then perhaps you had covered this in the first question, but maybe we'll reiterate it. Do the design services deliverables include CAD files?
Yep. Yeah, all of them have CAD exports. Scanifly software has, I think, 5 CAD exports at this point, including different 2D options, 3D options. There's parallel projection. There's also a perspective angle. There's with skew, without skew. So you have a variety of ways you can look at it. You can also get a CAD expert that has all of it baked into one that can be lifted and put right into any template that you need.
Okay. And then wrapping up, where is Eagle Point Solar based out of, and as well as Scanifly?
Todd, I think you're on mute.
My apologies. Eagle Point Solar is we have our headquarters in Dubuque, Iowa, and we service Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin.
And Scanifly is a fully remote software company, so we're actually all over the U.S.
All right, great. Well, that's all the time we have for today. If you have additional unanswered questions, feel free to contact our presenters on your own. This webinar will be shared with all registrants so you can view it again at your convenience. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for being here, and Scanifly, of course, for sponsoring today's webinar. And thank you to everyone in the audience for participating. I hope you enjoyed our presentation, and we invite you to join us for more Solar Power World webinars in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.